Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 14th segment of Kids and COVID-19 and our fourth webinar. I'm thrilled to team up with Coaching Peace Diana Cutaia and World Cup champion Tiffeny Milbret for today's webinar. And again, this is Coach Becky from Doc Wayne, and we're so grateful that you've joined us here today. And we are live streaming on Facebook, and the account for that is Doc Wayne DTG. So if you have friends who haven't registered for today, their registration is closed, but they can jump on our live feed if they're interested in listening in. So our country is in a state of great change. The systems and practices that we have had in place have been proven to be oppressive and unsafe for many. Youth and adults alike are suffering from mental health symptoms, and much more. And sport has played a significant part of many youth athletes' lives, but we know that it can be better. Until we find a cure or a vaccine for COVID, we have to think about how we can do things differently. And as we inch back onto the field and on the courts, and I've certainly seen some kids out on the playgrounds and some teams starting to get back into practices here where I live, we don't need to go back to the way that it was. We have a chance to put what's most important at the center of sport and model to our athletes that we as a society are innovative, that we care about their safety and their well-being, and that their character is most important. This is our moment for sports, so please let us not pass it up. So as we go through brief introductions today and the logistics of the webinar, please do ask us questions in the chat function, and you also have a Q&A function. So if you're on with us on Facebook Live, there's a comment section below. You can also give us a wave, you can give us a thumbs up, but if we miss anything at all, you can contact me and our team at support@docwayne.org. And if you have any questions about the organization at all, you can reach us at docwayne.org. So again, just to go over that again, there's a chat function, there's a Q&A function, and there's a comment section on Facebook Live. But if you haven't heard about us at Doc Wayne, our mission is to fuse sport and therapy to heal and strengthen at-risk youth. And when there's not a pandemic going on, we go into schools, community centers, and residential treatment facilities with our clinicians who utilize the term coach to reduce stigma and increase access. And right now we're providing telehealth services, but we are inching back onto the field just like most other organizations, and this summer we'll likely be providing socially distanced groups, and we'll be supporting summer camps in their efforts to assist kids in their mental health concerns. You can also follow us on our Twitter and our Instagram feeds at docwayne.org, at docwaynedtg, sorry. And also, I just want to remind everyone that this is the 14th episode, and this is part of a larger series called Kids and COVID-19. And you can see the rest of our episodes on our YouTube page, and the handle for that is DocWayneDTG. And at this time, I'd like to invite Diana Cutaia and Tiffeny Milbret to introduce themselves and give a little bit of background on their work. So Diana, do you want to start us off?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Becky. I really appreciate it. And thank you to you. Thank you to Doc Wayne for having me here today. I'm really excited to be able to kind of share with you some of my thoughts, some of my experiences, and some tips and tools and resources around kind of how we can mitigate some of the things that are going on, and really provide kind of safe spaces for young people when they return, or as they return to sport. So an organization called Coaching Peace. I've been running Coaching Peace a little under a decade, but I've been doing the work probably for about 30 years in some capacity. And the idea behind the work that we do really is around how we use sport as a tool to kind of create the culture and society that we want in the world. What are the things that we're doing? My master's thesis, the title was Coaching Peace. And it was really around this idea that the way we kind of introduced sport was not the way I wanted to. I thought we could do it differently. So when it was time for me to kind of start a business around some of that, it made sense that that would be what the name is. Much of the work we do is centered around sport, but we also kind of took a lot of the things that we learn around creating safe, positive cultures within sport. We've been able to translate in a whole host of different industries and organizations, from businesses to kind of nonprofits. So I'm excited to be with you all and have a long history with Doc Wayne from the beginning. So I've been so proud of just seeing the growth over the years, especially the last couple of years in the work that you've all done. So thank you for having me here today.
Thanks, Diana. And Boston lost a great one when you moved out to Portland, but it's great to be with you here today virtually. And Tiffany, do you want to share a little bit about yourself and your work today?
Thank you.
You're on. Oh.
Unmute. There we go. You had the controls, Rebecca. Thank you for having me on. I'm super excited. Speaking of Portland, obviously I'm a Portland native. That's what I call my permanent home now, even though my other work homes have been different cities. As a national team player, as a pro player for all those many years. Now I'm old enough where I've got a new journey. I've been a coach for the last 11 years and also been a director of coaches, which leads me right now currently to Tampa Bay United Youth Soccer Club down in Tampa, Florida. So a really cool, temperate zone down here, very hot. And yeah, I just, my biggest thing for me is taking all those lessons I learned as a player and now putting them into a different hat and now allowing myself to help impact the young player and the coaches that are trying to help impact young players. So it's I feel really fortunate to have a vital link in continuing to bring the game of soccer, but utilizing all the lessons and in a much more holistic view other than just player and soccer ball.
Perfect. Thank you both for joining us today. And you can see their contact information on the screen. And just want to go through our agenda today. You can see it there, but this is really a time for all of you. So feel free to let us know in the chat and the Q&A if you have other questions. And this new experience that we're all part of is very fluid. So if we don't get to your questions or your concerns today, feel free to reach out to me and our team at support@docwayne.org, and maybe we'll address it in a future webinar or breakout session. So just wanted to chat a little bit about youth sport, and youth sport appears in many contexts and infiltrates many aspects of society. Many youth athletes engage with one or more of these types of youth sport that you see there. And everyone here on the call has probably experienced some aspect of this. And I know Diana, Tiffany, and I all had some aspect of this influence our lives. And during COVID, we saw that youth sport and other backyard games really became virtual. But even prior to COVID, there were tremendous cracks, we'll say, in the system. Youth were dropping out of sport at alarming rates, reporting that it was no longer fun, and it was becoming an increasingly unequal playing field. So for someone that works with disadvantaged youth, sport really was becoming a place that we needed to address inequities. The costs were becoming really high to participate, and it's just becoming an unequal playing field. So then you fast forward a few months and COVID hits, and the George Floyd situation comes up, which we all know was not really a moment in time, but really represented the experiences of our Black community for hundreds of years. we see that regardless of the specific context that youth are experiencing sport, there are systemic issues such as racism, mental health, hyper-competitive adults, and other issues that are pervading youth sports. So we see that the consequences of all of this, that we're losing out on many of the possible large-scale benefits of sport as a society. And looping back to what Diana was talking about, is that there is tremendous benefit, and we really want to take advantage of that and harness that. And I don't want to lose sight of the fact that there are many individual kids and teams that are benefiting, but we want to take advantage and really harness the power of sport for all kids and for our next generation of young people. So that brings us to what is the purpose of sport? And we're at an interesting place in sports history and history really as a country and as a globe to ponder these things. And I want to bring Tiffany and Diana back in and ask them, what do they think about this? And there's really no right or wrong answer to this question. So I also invite everyone who's on the webinar today to insert their questions or thoughts into the Q&A function. And let's just ponder this together. Diana, do you want to go first and answer this question?
Okay, fantastic. Yes, absolutely. So the question that we're kind of posing, and I would love folks to kind of add into the chat what they're thinking about as well when we kind of talk about this, like what is the purpose of sport? Why sport? And I really believe that one of the things that we have to kind of recognize and understand is that the purpose of sport, at least in my mind, what I would love for the purpose of sport to be is to train the world to be together in community, right? To train us to kind of figure out, to use that space, to manage conflict, to manage issues when they come up, to kind of create opportunities where we see each other, our authentic, true selves, where we create equality, where we kind of come together in that space. And I think that we have this unique kind of opportunity in time and space to do that. So I'm interested to see what everybody kind of thinks about this idea of like, what is the purpose of sport? Because what I think the role of sport has been for a very long time is not necessarily what the role of sport should be as we kind of move forward. Tiffany, what do you think when you kind of talk about this idea of the purpose of sport?
Great, thanks.
There you go.
Tiffany.
Well, I mean, my goodness, Diana, you're going way into those deeper layers, which are exceptionally important. And I think those are, you know, I would absolutely agree that those are like really key foundational layers for sport. I know for me, like the best way I can answer it in general is obviously I always had the purpose for me was a greater picture, meaning I wanted it as a career. So just as, and as a female where that becomes it, where that's very important is because, you know, we have fewer opportunities. So I think for me, sport is all about opportunities, whether they're that specific, those specific pieces that you really stated, those really deeper layer pieces, or as something as very individual pieces that are highly attuned to each individual and their goals and their desires. You know, so for me, sport is always about opportunities for an individual, for a greater picture, and for those deeper layers as well.
Yeah. I love how you guys balance each other out. There's like the philosophical and then there's the practical. Before I responded, I wanted to read two responses that we had here, one in the chat and one in the Q&A. So we have from Rob, keep fit, learn teamwork, fair play when competing, respect person on the other side. And I love that, Rob. Thank you so much for responding. And I think I felt that in my own experience of sport. And then we have one from, I think it's Di, is allowing kids to have fun and connect. And we'll get to connection later on in our presentation before we get to one of the tools that we wanted to show you. And I also want to highlight the fun piece, because that's one of the reasons that kids are dropping out of sport, is they're not having fun. In many instances is they tried it out, they heard it was fun, and they didn't find it to be fun. So I think that's super important. Some of the thoughts that I've had mirror those, but also that sport is a microcosm of society, and that it mirrors that. But that we can use sport as a training ground for life. And it kind of like encapsulates all that all of you have said, is that life should be fun and there should be connections in life, and we should have teamwork in life, and we should be keeping fit and like enjoy keeping fit. So all of these things that everyone is saying is like, we want that in terms of a life for someone. So sport should reflect that too. And sport should be a training ground to teach those skills, so that when someone becomes 35 or 65 or hopefully 95, that they have those skills in their back pocket. But also, and I don't want to steal his thunder, but Eli Wolf is really great at talking about this, but the Olympics were really originally designed not all about sport, but someone originally like won a gold medal for poetry, like way back in the history of the Olympics, because they were thinking about the philosophy of life and combining the whole person and the mind and the body, and blending culture and education. And truly look up Eli's work, because he's far better at talking.
One of the best. One of the best.
Absolutely, Diana. And he's written some really wonderful pieces about it that thoroughly explain this. But they also talk about joy. So again, that's like the mirror of society and sport, is like, you want someone to have joy in their life, so why not train them and like show them that in sport? And talking about the educational value of sport. So I think we just want to balance that out of like, sport should have these pieces in it because we value them in life. So I could probably go on about that for a really long time, but we all have other interests in this webinar. Any last bit to add, Diana?
Yeah, Becky, I would love to add just a snippet to that. I think what you hit on is really important. We kind of talk about this idea that sport prepares us for life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, sport socializes us in a way to create the environment that we then live in, right? So if we think about sport kind of as the, you know, our first introduction to the world, you know, in that way, and our ability to change it, if we used sport as a way to actually kind of teach the skills and deconstruct the systems that otherwise do not create a society, either create an oppressive society, create an inequitable society, whatever it might be. If we use sport as a way to dismantle and deconstruct that, then it creates this great opportunity around rethinking and reimagining sport, right? So you talked about this idea of play and fun. Well, when we think about modern sport, right, they're always kind of ancillary things. They're the things that we kind of talk about, like, you know, like, we're going to work hard, you're going to be competitive and have fun, right? No. You're going to have fun in that. And you also might learn in that process how to work hard and, you know, all those other things that may or may not be of value to you or may or may not be important. But play wasn't necessarily introduced in sport as early on as we think it was, right? So the idea of play is somewhat of a kind of contemporary idea, that we have play and joy, that should be part of sport. Sport was very functional in its kind of design. What it was designed to do was really around this idea of like training for war, training for conflict, you know?
Right.
So the functional idea of sport and how that changes and how we can think about that differently. Well, we're not doing that anymore, right? We're doing something different. We want sport to kind of redesign the way society is. And we have this little microcosm, as you called it, to actually begin to think about that and to reimagine that. And how exciting is that opportunity? How challenging is it? But how exciting is it, you know, in that same framework?
Right, that's a good lead in to the slide here, where really we talked about the mirror and the training ground, but just to remind everyone that lots of kids play sports in America, and credit to Aspen on this one, but 3 out of 4 kids in American households are playing sports. So in terms of the reach of sport, it's very wide, and we can dismantle systems if sport is properly rolled out. And I just also want to highlight mental health too, is that we're talking about fun and joy and happiness and dismantling systems and all that. But we know that there are widespread needs in this country right now, and there always have been, but especially with COVID right now and isolation, is that this is the secondary pandemic around mental health. And this is a wonderful way to use preventative care to reach kids. So there's not enough providers, I'm one of them, to reach kids when they re-enter and they come back to school and they come out in the fields, but coaches can be equipped with basic mental health skills and understanding of referral systems and community efforts to be able to assist with mental health. And that's one of the great values of sport if it's properly harnessed. Tiffany, did you want to talk a little bit about your view of mental health in the sports system?
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, I obviously, as you guys have said, like this can go so deep in so many different areas and ways. So just for me, just to simplify it, like in terms of what it took for me, it's that mental, emotional, psychological pillar that is actually the driver as you start to get older and older and older and older. And so what we do understand, what little bit is the healthier the mental and the emotional and the psychological aspect, doesn't mean that nothing is challenging and they're gonna always just get what they want, even if they work hard. No, but we have the support systems, we have the ability to have access to allowing these athletes to really talk about what they're feeling, what they're going through. Because I've had both where I didn't have those support systems and when I had those support systems. And I'm just telling you, I really believe it's never too young. And I don't think it's even about sport. I think it's just about being alive and being a human being. But sport performance and what we really truly understand about sport is driven by the whole mental, emotional, psychological pillar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's well said.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this sort of encapsulates and like summarizes a lot that we've been talking about, but just pulled a quote from Megan Rapinoe lately. And I don't know if people watch the ESPYs, but she said, let's create a society. And I'm dreaming, what if we lived in a world where we all respected each other because we were all actually equal and our society reflected that. So it just got me thinking about, if that's her dream for the world, what does that look like in sport? And I think we've already started to talk about that, but I hope that we're not just dreaming for the world, because there are systems in place that our kids experience, like the educational system, the sports system. There are various ways that our kids interact and they learn. And if you dream about the world, to Tiffany's point about the practicality of all of this, you have to dream about the underlying systems. And you have to then, as sort of a third layer, figure out how to actually make this happen. And I think that's where we're sort of headed next with the conversation today, is like, we can all dream, but then we have to figure out the layers underneath and then how to practically make that happen for our kids and their support structures, which are most frequently adults and their caregivers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important kind of to even recognize, like, it's very easy to get defensive and get scared of what we don't know, and to resist change because we feel as though change might, that might impact me really terribly, as opposed to thinking like, no, equality, fairness, dismantling of systems that have been oppressive. They actually, if we think about what they look like, right, then I think we will get less defensive, and we will create an opportunity where we will, or kind of a space in our own minds where we're like, oh, that's what it looks like. I actually want to be in that space. That actually looks like a wonderful space. But we're so kind of myopic that we get so focused on the now and what is, that we're not willing to kind of take a look at that. And sport is an institution, unlike, many within the US in particular, but I think globally, where it is considered sacred, right? Don't touch sport. You can change anything else, any other industry, don't touch sport, because sport its purity has to be like this, and it should be like this. And, I think if we thought about it differently, it's exciting. Like, what could it be? Why does it have to be just like this? It could be anything that we want it to be. There are no rules. At least in my world, there are no rules, but I don't know. I don't know about other worlds. I mean, there's some rules, but
Well, we're gonna transition from the sort of philosophical to the resources and kind of the how-to. And we wanted to start with the organizational level, which includes in our minds clubs, SPYDs, governing bodies, and more. And then we'll get to the coach, and then a tool that I've been thinking about around how to actually talk to kids. So I just want to give you that sort of framework as we move through the conversation. So for those who employ coaches, or for those who assist and support organizations who do, it's important that they structure their organizations in a way that they value and they appreciate and understand these elements that you see on the screen here. And the work can't be left to just coaches, because oftentimes we hear from coaches that they're doing the work themselves, which is wonderful, but there's not a lot of support from above. So we put this together to try to help organizations think about all that's going on. And we do want to acknowledge that there is a lot to take in as an organization. So starting with systemic racism, it's important to look inward first if you're a white-led organization, and really understand American history and do some thinking about that, do some reading, do some due diligence, and all that impacts life for you, for kids. And on the resource list is the implicit bias test, which I recommend people take and understand their biases. And just understand also that it's not just actions that impact others, but also inactions. And before I move on, Diana, do you want to add anything around this suggestion for organizations to take a look at systemic racism?
Yeah, I think it's really important for us to kind of begin to think and recognize and understand. I've been struggling for a long time with this word inclusion. Right. And the word kind of challenges me for one reason. And the reason is it's this idea of being included, and being included in a system that wasn't designed for you is very hard. Right. So sport, as in society, was designed by white men for white men. It is, the idea that whiteness and maleness is what is kind of ever important, and structuring an entire kind of society and sport around that. And then to say to folks of color, to women, to folks with kind of physical disabilities, cognitive disabilities, to say like, oh, well, we're going to find out ways for you to be included in it, right, is somewhat problematic for me, as opposed to saying, wait a second, why don't we actually think about what within those constructs were not designed for us, and actually redesign that. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, although I think you're going to kind of cover some of those things in subsequent webinars kind of as you go down.
Yes.
So I think it's important for organizations to kind of understand that, like, we need to kind of rethink that idea around inclusion a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then one thing that I'll add is that I've been in clubs and inside these organizations, and there's definitely not enough conversations. There's definitely not people being held accountable for making sure they're talking about all of these current pieces or ethical pieces, or, you know, like I don't know, we can't just be eyes shut anymore and just going with the flow. And I don't have time and energy for, no, like, you know, I feel like there's been plenty of moments when I've been the one to, you know, offer up a female, like, you gotta, you know, but, oh, there's Tiff, like, just chatting it up because of the female giving the guys crap. Well, you know, no, you have to think about this. This is what, or from the kids' perspective, I'm fighting parents to, no, we got to take you out of your parent lenses and do you even understand the kids' lenses? So it's just, it's these things that we have to have conversations about, that it's just not acceptable to not have them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. You know, when we talk about this idea of kind of bringing people to the table and having those voices at the table, it's still, even the concepts of like, you're going to get a seat at the table denotes that you don't own the table. Somebody else does. You get to have a seat at it. Well, no, we have to reimagine and rethink about what that looks like. And we have to kind of challenge ourselves and ask ourselves those questions. So to Tiffany's point, I think it becomes really important to begin to have those conversations, as difficult as they might be, as uncomfortable as they might be. It's absolutely essential for us to start to have those conversations.
Yeah. Thank you both for your points. They're great. And as we continue through this slide that you see, I just want to point out, we talked about some of these before about mental health. That is the secondary pandemic. And most of the kids have just gained an ACEs score, so an adverse childhood experience. And we really need to support coaches with training and connections to local providers. And we put on some other webinars that really directly address that and giving skills to coaches. So you can see those on our YouTube page. And also, if you can't find them at all, please just contact me at support@docwayne.org and I will direct you to those. But also thinking about outcomes, because outcomes and goal setting really do speak. So you can do some of this work, but where you place the value in terms of outcomes to your athletes is what they're really going to see. And also just thinking about how that comes across intentionally and unintentionally. So as a coach, if you're giving playing time, or if you're looking at someone and smiling at someone versus you're thinking you're giving your efforts elsewhere, just be really aware of that. And also partnering with parents and folks that have been traditionally disempowered is really important around outcomes. And
Becky,
then, go ahead.
When you get it, can I want to ask you a question. So when you kind of talk about this idea of mental health as the secondary pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
would you call it the secondary pandemic, or was it the original pandemic and then COVID came in?
I feel like there's so many public health concerns going on at the same time, but it certainly was a pandemic prior to COVID. I feel like it was unveiled, is that people became more aware, but there are certainly concerns that came up because of COVID. I don't want to not speak to that. And what I'm talking about is that kids who were being seen physically, so they like actually were seen face to face, have not been seen. So kids who were being screened for things like suicide face to face, or kids who were seen in schools every day are not being seen. And so they're in homes that potentially are not safe for them. And so the concerns have gone up because the reporting structures of our society are not there right now. So certainly there was tremendous concern for kids and adult mental health prior, but there's sort of this piece around isolation and reporting that happened during COVID.
I feel too, I think that makes tremendous sense, that like the other thing that we don't talk about as much, but I think is becoming really important, is the mental health of those coaches, right? And how kind of everybody's in their heightened stress response to begin with around it. And when you have coaches that are subjected and have been dealing with racism, have been dealing with homophobia, have been dealing with these issues already, right? To compound that in all of this, I think is something also for us to be really cognizant of and think about when we talk about mental health, not just of the kids, but also of those who serve the kids.
Yeah, I'll comment, but then also invite Tiffany to comment afterwards because I know she works with coaches. But in my experience in talking to coaches in the US, but also globally during COVID, is that they're under tremendous strain because they are being asked to do things that are above and beyond right now. Doing Zoom calls, doing phone calls, reaching out to kids to check on them, and they're seeing things that they don't usually see. Which they're being heroes because of that, but they are under duress themselves because of what's going on and because of, financial constraints, because of being stuck in their home, all of those things, but also because they're trying to be the regulation function for their kids that they're working with, and they haven't been trained in that, and they're doing their very best. But I don't know, Tiffany, do you have things to add because you employ and work with coaches?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is that we're, as a club, placing a lot of responsibility on us to give some support to our coaches. Reaching out, having, giving them materials. I think it's have to understand that the adults are going crazy too, living within the four walls, not just to mention because they get just as much release being out there, being, passionate about servicing the youth, passionate about growing themselves, similar to what a player does. And so it's just where the employer, somebody like me, takes we have to take a greater responsibility to try to have our touch-in points, our connection points, because at minimum, what we want our coaches to feel is supported. They're not going through this alone. And we're here to help in any way, shape, or form for them too, because we understand that they're also the middle person to helping reach our families and players as well.
Yeah, certainly. So taking all of that into consideration, we're all pivoting towards the new normal. And I think it's just most important that we take this lens that we're shaping the new generation. And there's just so many kids that play sport, and there's 6.5 million coaches. So it's so vital that we think about sport and that we put emphasis on designing the new version of sport. Because if we go back to the old version, we would have lost our opportunity, and all of these pieces around safety, mental health, systemic racism, outcomes, we're missing a huge opportunity. And as we transition to questions, I don't know if there's things, Diana and Tiffany, you want to add as I check on the Q&A and chat features, and welcome people to send in any questions.
Go for it, Tiffany.
Okay, well, I just wanted to say, I listened to a really interesting podcast the other day, and I don't really listen to them. And it was just, aren't we kind of already reset? It doesn't mean we already know what to do in the future, but it was the whole, one of the key points of this podcast is that it's not a new normal. It's just now it's new. And now we have a chance to learn from what we've been doing and now applying to our new way, because we can't, the argument was we can't ever shift back. And why would we ever want to shift back? Because there's so much that we can take care of, because we have now this great perspective of looking back and solving and debriefing and understanding what isn't working. And in this new, we can now apply kind of action plans and new ways of doing things, so that now we are living better.
Yeah.
I would agree. Absolutely.
Perfect. Well, I don't see any questions, so we will have an opportunity for questions at the end. And for those who are on Facebook Live, feel free again to use the comment section. I see a few of you on there, but if we don't get to you, you can reach out to us at support@docwayne.org. And we're going to transition into some skills that Diana wants to share with us. So I'm going to hand it over to her to talk through some practical applications.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. What I think we've seen in all of this is that what we miss, I know what I miss the most is connection, right? Those relationships. I think they're so valuable and so important. I'm an extrovert. I don't know if anybody can tell that, but I'm an extrovert. So people give me energy to begin with. But even my introvert friends, right, are like, oh, I miss people. Even if it's just one person that I get to, like, I miss people. I think what we will find is as we have kind of had to socially and physically, I mean, not socially, but physically distance from each other, right? We have found that those relationships are what was valued the most, right? So no matter what anyone kind of talks about in sport, no one says like, gosh, I really miss sprinting drills. Like that is the thing I miss the most. Like, gosh, no, they'll say like, I miss being in community with other people and talking to other people. What I have found in talking with a lot of coaches and administrators are the coaches and administrators that are being able to fare this and weather this the most with their athletes are the ones that centered relationships in their programs and built really solid, firm relationships. Because now, whether I'm in front of a screen or I'm in front of you, when we have that connection, I am able to truly kind of check in with you and reach out to you. And it doesn't feel awkward and doesn't feel weird because we already have that together. So what I want to do is just kind of give a quick kind of tips and tools around how we build those relationships. And we can do that now, even in COVID, as we're kind of physically distanced from each other. And when we come back, we can do that as well. And I kind of separate that into kind of three buckets here. The ability to listen, the ability to observe, and the ability to respond. They become really, really important. And the first is listening. And I don't mean listening just when someone's talking to you. I think we spend a lot of time kind of being like, oh, I'm going to listen to what you say. I'm going to remember everything that you say. But in reality, it's also about kind of being present and listening to see what are the ways that you express joy? What are the words that you use? What are the ways that you express frustration or sadness? What are the words that you use in order to do that? How do you communicate? And what do you say to others when you are reaching for that connection? What do you say to others when you want to celebrate their joy? I think it's important for us to kind of be just holistic listeners. As my grandmother would always say, you were given one mouth but two ears, so that you can use them a little bit more than the other. I think that once we kind of create that environment where we truly are listening, we're listening to understand. We're not listening to respond. We're not listening so that we can we truly want to understand. I want to get to know you. I want to know who you are. Right? I want you to be your authentic self. And the only way for you to be your authentic self, right, is to feel as though you've been heard, that I see you. The next is this idea of observation. You know, as coaches, we spend a ton of time just watching and kind of really getting the lay of the land, right? That's where, in fact, I've always said, like, the greatest coaches are the ones that can truly sit back and see. So what are we looking for when we're kind of observing? We're looking for those same things. We're not just looking to see what do you say when you're trying to express joy or sadness or frustration or whatever it might be, but what do you do? What are the actions? I'm paying attention. I'm clued into you. So when I do even Zoom calls with folks, which gets so frustrating when there's like 200 people on a call, I'm constantly trying to make eye contact, even though people don't know I'm making eye contact with them. right? I'm constantly trying to like check in and observe and see, because we learn so much through somebody's actions, right? We truly kind of get to know them and respect them a little bit because we see how they interact, and we're not trying to manage that behavior. We're trying to observe that behavior, right? Because that is who somebody is. That's so telling for us. The next is responding. And when I talk about responding, I really mean like kind of that authentic, genuine response. So we respond in how we communicate. So if you're talking to me, and we'll go over this a little bit, like I'm truly giving you signals that I'm listening, right? In that way. But responding through our own kind of lens of empathy, and responding by kind of checking in. If I observe that I know when so-and-so athlete gets frustrated, they kind of disengage a little bit, they walk away, but they're really looking for me to kind of come in and be like, hey, I see you, like maybe it's a tap on the back, or maybe it's like, a little high five in a Zoom meeting, whatever it might be, or a private message like, hey, I'm checking in. That ability to kind of respond and to be responsive in those ways, I think truly builds those connections. So I would ask yourself, when you are with your athletes, number one, how did I listen today? And what did I hear? Right? I would think about like, what are the ways that I truly paid attention to the actions and behaviors of my athletes? Because we know, and we say all the time that behavior is a great form of communication. It's one of the best forms of communication, right? We spend so much time trying to manage it that we actually forget that it's telling us something. It's telling a story. We have to listen. We have to be aware of what that is. And then like, what are the ways that I responded? And did I respond in a way that really validated what that athlete was experiencing or what that kid was telling me? Did I respond for them, or did I respond for me? Did I say what I needed to say, right? Because I had to get that, or did I say what they needed to hear in those moments, or what I wanted to kind of convey about who they are? And I think those things, if we could focus even on those three things in this time, we truly can build stronger connections, at least stronger relationships.
Thanks, Diana. And I think some of what you said is highlighted here, but I want to go over some specific listening strategies that support what Diana talked about. But I do want to say that none of what Diana talked about is possible if you don't take care of yourself. So coach self-care is not often talked about, but clinician self-care is talked about every day in the mental health world. So taking care of yourself so that you can properly provide therapy is an everyday conversation. But unfortunately, it's not an everyday conversation in the athletic world around coaching, and it absolutely should be. Because you have to put your oxygen mask on so that you can be able to listen, and you have to be regulated so that you can regulate someone else. And I know those are therapy words, but essentially it means that you have to be in a good space and you have to be able to listen so that you can help another person. But just to go through a few of these, and again, there is another webinar that goes through all of these in depth, but your voice is absolutely a tool. So if you talk in a really rushed way, or you're really stressed out and you say like, how can I help you? No one is going to take you up on that. And people are just going to take the cue that you are not in a space that you can be a helper. So they're just going to continue on their way, and they're not going to say, actually, yeah, can I check in with you? Can I ask for help? Can I utilize you as a support? So you need to, one, regulate yourself, and then utilize your voice as a tool, as a calming tool and a regulatory tool. But with that said, you can also use your voice as a tool to increase someone's regulation. So in sport, there are exciting moments. So you can use your voice to help someone get ready for a game and things like that. But also use questions. So as a coach, you don't want to come into a circle of kids and say, this is what I see, and this is what we shall do. But you say, what did you all see? What do you think we should do? And so oftentimes kids come with really great suggestions. And when they come up with suggestions, then it empowers them and they're able to make change. And body position, Diana noticed this, especially on Zoom. Lean in when someone says something that's impactful, nod your head slightly, really show them that you're listening. Because if you're off to the side, you're staring down, you're looking at your phone, that doesn't show that you're listening. Choice, there's a lot that's uncontrollable, especially in the COVID environment, but also speaking about oppression. So as much choice as you can give them is wonderful. And then what we've been hearing from coaches here at Doc Wayne is that as they utilize these skills, they're being better listeners and they're actually hearing more. So the more they hear, the more comes out from kids and families. And it's important to have a red flag list so that you can develop proper protocol with your organization so that they know what to do. So if they hear about concerning mental health issues or say like domestic violence or food insecurity or things like that, they have a protocol. And we'll go through the tool that I developed at the end that will give you some guidance around this. Back to you, Diana.
Oh, I think Tiffany wants to make a comment. Yes. We got to unmute her.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. Can you just go back?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
There you go.
The one thing I wanted to completely come clean about is that these are still a work in progress for me. Like there is no question I have had to have absolute awareness and intention to building every single one of these things into not just my coaching repertoire, but my leadership repertoire for my coaches. So I just really wanted to, I don't even know if you can correlate it to maturity or not, because I definitely feel like I'm way more mature than I was 10 years ago, but I still have way more maturity yet to go. But I just really wanted to reiterate that I don't know if anyone is born with any of these. I know I sure wasn't, and I sure didn't do some of these very well. I did other things, but it is something that you must work on if you really care about impacting people.
Oh, I so appreciate that comment because people are not born as a mental health clinician. And so I think coaches do, when they try to learn some of these things, they do have a bit of judgment because most people from the sports context are perfectionists. And so they're really striving for excellence. And I just want to make sure that people know that these are skills from one industry to another that can help them. And there is absolutely no judgment about learning and being better. And I myself am learning every day, probably as is Diana, and we are only here to help. And we're learning from you, Tiffany, too. So this is just a learning community that we're all sharing different best practices. And so no one should feel any shame about maybe not doing everything here that we're sharing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it's a good point, and I the shame, or you're right, we have to come outside of ourselves to really be self-aware, obviously, but I just think that you have to look at the results that are in front of you, meaning how are you impacting? Are they listening? I really like what you have to say. Everybody has a different listening style, but if you can see the results in a different way. You can see a general enjoyment factor from you can see a retention factor from your families, from there's all these other things that these really important items that you're talking about are the reward pieces to that. So I think it's just such a greater picture about the connection and I really believe what people deserve.
Yeah. And one last piece before I transition back to Diana is that there was an athlete on Team USA that I was speaking to the other day, and she pointed out some of these in different words. And she was talking about how it completely changed her performance. So we're talking about the holistic picture of an athlete, but I don't think there's a disconnect between the development of character and a person and their performance. It's absolutely the same thing in terms of skill building and making someone feel valued and making someone feel supported and confident, and their performance on the field or the court.
Absolutely. And, you know, one of the things that you mentioned, Becky, that then Tiffany had talked about before, that I want to make that connection, is we talked about this idea of self-care, right? Mm-hmm. And I think when we talk about self-care, sometimes what we do is we push all of this responsibility back onto the person. And I think there is some, as adults, there is some responsibility for us to kind of create spaces where we take care of ourselves. But Tiffany talked about this a little bit before, and I think it's important. Organizations also have a responsibility to create environments where people are okay, right? So like, I need to help you. If I'm running an organization, my job is to make sure you got to do some self-care, but you shouldn't have to do too much of it, because I actually should be mitigating some of that, at least within the control that I have in that space, right? So like, instead of being like, yep, it's a work environment, like it's hard, like we're going to do it, take care of yourself. You're like, oh, wait a second. You have some responsibility in this too, to kind of create an environment where I feel okay. Yeah. You know, so not to kind of abdicate some of that responsibility. Not that I thought that you were indicating that at all, but like, I wanted to kind of make that point around self-care, that as we learn self-care, it becomes really important. And I think during this time in COVID, everybody has learned a little bit more about self-care than they ever have before. Right. But then those responsibilities, is kind of Tiffany's talking about, like, you know, she talks like, I check in with my coaches, you know, I make sure that they're okay. I don't just assume they're okay, but I actually make an intentional effort to check in with them.
Great point. Yeah.
So let's talk about connections, you know, in kind of a little bit of the time we have. So, you know, I think what has been so interesting to me is when I talk with organizations and when I talk with young people, they really miss that ability to be in community. And we see the strength in that community, right? So people that I know who have children are like, ugh, I miss my community, right? Like I'm with them all the time. I love my kids, but like, we realize that so much of what we do in this world and the way that we survive is through community, and that those connections become so valuable and important, and are kind of the lifeblood of society and what we do. I mean, we are social creatures. We need to be in community with people. We don't survive without being in community with people. So we kind of extract everybody from, you know, each other. I feel like it's the universe's way of being like, look, the only way I'm going to get you guys to take care of this planet is if I separate you all. That's it. But so that connection becomes so important, not just in COVID, but even when we come back. And I think what we're finding is when we come back to sport, when we're kind of in those spaces, what are the ways, number one, that we really teach young people to collaborate? You know, we always think of competition as a, you know, us versus them type of thing. I think of competition as this great collaboration, right? You work hard, I work hard. You don't work hard, then I probably won't work as hard, right? It's this really kind of very connected dance. So what are the ways that we create opportunities for collaboration? What are the ways we do that outside of sport? What are the ways we do that in sport? And not just around team building, because team building, again, kind of just is very focused on like, it is just about us and our team. But how do we actually organizationally think about that? How do we think about that as leagues? How do we think about that in, you know, schools? All of those ways that we truly can get kids to kind of look at collaboration as something that's positive, that kind of builds. Like, I'm going to compete against you, but I'm going to compete against you because you worked you're pushing me so hard. And I'm so appreciative of that because it pushes me to work really hard. The next is like how we kind of communicate, how we provide opportunities to communicate. I can't tell you, I've probably trained 50,000 coaches in my career over the last 30 something years, right? And I can't tell you the number of coaches in particular that talk about girls but not always, that'll say, Diana, do me a favor. Can you tell me how to get the kids to stop talking? They don't listen to me. And my response has always been, I will never, ever advocate for kids to stop talking, right? What I will advocate for is creating opportunities within the work that you do so that they can communicate, so that they can talk. Because what other space really do we have where we learn how to overcome conflict, where we learn how to overcome and repair harm, than in sport, in physical activity? There's the whole idea of sport is conflict. So, all these opportunities to talk to each other. So what are the ways that we're really embedding that into our program and that we're making that part of our program? That communication is key, and not communication like, hey, coming up on your left, watch that person, right? Which is important, which my coach yelled at me all the time. It's more along the lines of like, how are we actually managing? Like, how do we create spaces where like, I truly am talking to you? The next like kind of around connection is this idea of celebration. What are the things that we are celebrating? I always said that I wonder what work environment would be if you think about it, right? If you came to work every day and the minute you walked in, your coworkers were like, Becky, Tiffany, you're here. Oh my God, thank you for coming to work today. That's incredible, right? Every day. Would you not want to be there every day? You'd be like, oh my God, people love me. Like they love me. They want me to be there every day. Like, what are the ways that we truly are celebrating and connecting with young people? I think that becomes so important. Those celebrations, as small as they might be, it doesn't have to be, that they did something miraculous. It's you showed up today. I'm so glad you're here. This is the best thing ever that you are here because you matter. You're important. I care about you. I want to see you every day. When you talk about this idea that now we don't have those touch points with kids, especially with kids that, are grappling with potential suicide or depression or anxiety, all those things, the very nature of being important to somebody, of feeling as though my existence is celebrated in all these variety of ways, right, is this connection that really helps me feel safe. So what are the ways that we are doing that? So I would ask ourselves those questions, like even in COVID, how are we teaching our young people how to collaborate? What are the ways that we're doing? How do we talk about collaboration? How are we talking about and really encouraging communication? How do we communicate with our young people? Right? What are the things that we say to them and the ways in which we engage with them? And then the next is like, what are the ways we celebrate that connection? We celebrate who they are, their authentic self, so that they feel as though they are valued and they matter.
Yeah. So Diana, you mentioned something early on about the dreaded C word, being the competition or the competitive piece of it, right? And I don't know, I came across this saying the other day and it just really resonated with me. And it is similar to what you were trying to talk about. It just says, I am in competition with no one. I have no desire to play the game of being better than anyone. I am simply trying to be better than the person I was yesterday. And there's just, even Rebecca, you mentioned, some really negative competition amongst, attitudes. And that is a really key point where we've all been a part of wanting to compete and be a part of top level teams but ultimately it's the competition. It really is just about being better than you were before, not I want to be better than them. So I don't know, that really resonated with me, what you said early, that small little piece.
I love that. I love that quote. And I love that, I think, when we think about competition, like I am fiercely competitive with myself because I love the ability to be like, what can I do? And I don't use it as a measure or a metric to measure my worth. And I feel like oftentimes we set up environments with young people where it's like, I'm either good or I'm not. And if I'm not good, then I'm not good, as a person. And I think that idea, there was a Leave It to Beaver. It's like old shows. But it was a Leave It to Beaver, and there was like something was going on, and he, he's talking to his dad, and very patriarchal kind of space, but he said, you know, well, Dad, I was just trying to prove myself. And he says, B, you've never got to prove yourself. You've only got to improve yourself. And I remember that statement every day. And like, I don't have to prove it to myself. I don't have to prove it to everybody. Every day I want to be a little bit better of a version than I was the day before, or at least want to try. You know, if we're always thinking about the outcome and we don't focus on the process, then we lose the love of the process. Like, let the outcome be what it is. Every day try. And no matter what it is, that's okay. Because every day you're putting in that effort, you're trying, you're showing up. Even if that's all you do is show up. Even if you're like, this is all I can give you today is I'm showing up. I don't know what else I can do, but I'm showing up.
Yeah.
Right? That in and of itself is something to celebrate. That's what I tell myself when I go to the gym, when I'm like, I don't want to be here today. I showed up. I just showed up. That's all I can do today.
Hallelujah.
Yeah.
Right?
We'll cheer for you, Diana.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Well, I wanted to share with everyone a guide for coaches who are showing up and are showing up for kids every day. And they're doing the best they can. And I'm going to put this in the chat function. Those who want to pull it off of Dropbox. And if you have any trouble, again, just contact me. But what we're hearing from coaches is they're doing these things that Diana's talking about, and they're building relationships. They're doing their best to create connections, but they truly don't know what to ask or sort of what categories of conversations to bring up. Because again, as I talked about earlier, they're trained in sport. And most coaches, if they've signed up for coaching, they are innately or naturally relationship builders. But just wanted to provide this tool. And I know it's small on the screen, but again, you can download it on Dropbox. But it's a tool to give some questions and some guidance around safety, physical sport readiness, mental health, or their mental game. And that's a completely fine way to phrase it to kids. Their supports and their connections to adults and their peers in their community. And some other access points and some other miscellaneous areas like COVID, systemic oppression. And under safety, you'll also see things like housing insecurity and food insecurity. And so the concept is that when you ask these questions, you can, I say you, meaning like the coach could ask these questions, or they could phrase it to the parent. Give a rating scale. So if there's no concern, they can rate it as a 0, or if there's no information. And you can also rate it as a 1, which is a watch, or a 2 as there needs to be action. And the smiley face indicates a strength. So we also don't want to be so concerned and negative that we don't acknowledge strength. So going through the scale, many coaches will know the answers to these questions without going through like a full interview of a kid, but they'll take a look at them and say, yes, I know that this child is fully supported in their community. They may not be ready to go on the field. They haven't really been physically active. So they may be able to fill out, 60 to 70% of it. And then they may be able to look at some of the questions and say, I really should ask about their mental health, or I should follow up to make sure that I can really solidly ask that. And then as a second layer, you can take this rating tool, add them up privately, and you can take a look at your players across the board. So you can say, where are our 2s, sort of action steps? Where do we have a lot of 2s? So we have 18 players on our roster. Do we have a lot of safety concerns, or do we have a lot of strengths around connection, but half of our players need mental health support? So as a youth development agency, we need to build a solid list of community-based supports around mental health. Just in terms of seeing trends and seeing where you might need to fill some holes around weaknesses, and also celebrate, as Diana acknowledged, strengths. So you'll see this. You're very welcome to use this tool. If you do use it, I would appreciate feedback in terms of where you see it working or not working. The last thing I'll say too is that you can adjust this to work with parents. So if you adjust the language and you feel it's best to talk with parents about rather than kids, every organization is different. You could use it as a check-in tool to say, we are preparing to re-enter sport and we wanted to best support our kids and families and wanted to make sure that we as an organization or a sport club are providing you with a more holistic experience of sport, and wanted to ask you some questions about things that you might be experiencing due to COVID. Tiffany, do you want to comment on it? I know you haven't seen much of this, but about perhaps its use or the concept of it in a club setting?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's anytime we can get coaches thinking about what they need to provide for their athletes, I think it's just a really important starting point. We don't expect to have people have had clinical experience, whether it's in their studies, in their profession, or in their personal lives, right? But what we can do is we can help kind of start reframing at least some of the minimal key things that we can be more aware of as adults to young people. I know even you mentioned the parents. I mean, I have a lot of opportunity to try to influence parents and help them as well. And the biggest thing I'm trying to get them to understand is just reframing their parent lens and giving the full respect to the individual that is their child. Or, we just have, I've seen it. I've been through it. Parents start talking, kids roll their eyes, like you just see the lack of connection. You see a lack of awareness of how they're impacting their kid, and it's the same for coaches. I mean, I see coaches like on and on and on, and they don't know that the players are glazing over. It's like, wait, hang on. I really we got to give the sport back to the athlete. We have to empower them way more, and we have to respect them. To me, it's an environment. They're the ones playing. We've got to give them the 100% respect that it's theirs. We're just helping them try to fulfill their career goals. Like I had career goals from very young. Like it's real. But at the end of the day, they're the ones playing. We've got to respect what they need. And this is a great start to helping, I think, show that respect that we're trying to dig a little deeper for them and support them a little better and deeper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Diane, any thoughts before we move on?
No, I mean, I think any opportunity to kind of really create some awareness and some openness. I think one thing for folks to be very cognizant of is to kind of not put necessarily kids in buckets around things. Like when we get information is just one data point that kind of helps us understand somebody. It is not a defining characteristic of who they are. It doesn't, define the whole person. So I think that's important to kind of understand. But I think the more we know about our athletes, the more we're aware of the experiences that they have, the more we actually can be empathetic, the more we can kind of create environments where we truly are connecting with them. And we take ourselves out of kind of judgment as well.
Yeah, I think what their narrative is more important than a data point, as you're saying. And so as you're using this, it's always really helpful to have a quick scale so that you can see points that might be of concern. But as you're looking at those points of concern, always weight the child and the family's narrative much more than the score that they had. And especially around mental health, is that diagnoses can label people and can put people in buckets, as Diane is saying, and we never want that to happen because it certainly defines people. So as we start to conclude today, just want to ask, where does that leave us? And we asked at the start, like, what did you learn from COVID? And I just want to ask if you want to put in the chat, what would you have done differently? And we all experienced something that we may not ever experience, hopefully, again in our lifetime. But if you're with us on Facebook or on Zoom webinar here, feel free to let us know any retrospective thoughts that you had, or sorry, have. But any thoughts from either of you, Tiffany or Diana, on what you might have done differently?
Oh gosh, I would have probably made sure I moved to a warmer place in some respects. When you say differently, so differently in what kind of context? What's the question?
I mean, this whole conversation has been sort of phrased around sport. And I know we all have different work contexts, but it's hard because our person is intertwined with our work, and it's become more so during COVID. So I think for myself, it's hard to really separate those right now. So when I even ask myself that question, it's kind of mixed with like, what would I have done differently? And I actually think back to your conversation points about relationships and connections. It's a reminder that it hit so quickly, but just thinking that those are the most important things no matter what. And I think as we continue on and things change and things evolve and new protocol comes out and the states and the federal government come out with new guidelines, we need to sort of lean back on what we just shared around relationships and connections. And we all might go into sort of different phases of what should we do? What should we decide? And it's a little bit stressful, but just to lean back on that, relationships and connections are most important.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think I'm torn because part of me is like, COVID has brought a lot of things to the forefront that otherwise we may not have ever seen. And maybe we would have, it's brought inequity to center stage and oppression in a way that I'm not sure we ever would have had happen had we not had it. So while I don't want to say that there's tremendous tragedy in all of this around COVID, and I don't want to say that tragedy doesn't exist in any way, but to think about how we've been able to see as a country, and it shouldn't have taken this, but it did, to kind of see that inequity and see that oppression, and that, it feels different this time. It feels like there's movement for change in a way that I've never felt in my, almost half a century of living. So how do we, capitalize on that? So like, what would I have done different? I'm not quite sure. Other than thinking about maybe, would I have solidified those connections and those relationships differently, and kept them,
Yeah, Tiffany, anything?
Yeah, that's always a tough question, because I think it's, in order to have something maybe done different, it's not always in your control. Like Diana, with what you're saying before about the organization might, or, or society, Rebecca, that's been closed off, or you maybe tried some things and you got fired or something. I don't know, right? Like so not to say that I've done everything perfect by any means, but I just feel like what will be different is that when and if there are moments that I have to say something or have to try to instigate and facilitate change, I will. Yeah. I think that's kind of now.
Absolutely.
That's great. So we want to end with two different thoughts. And one is that exactly what Tiffany said, is that we all have a responsibility to make change. And it's important to start with yourself. But there are possibilities for widespread change, even in a very complex sport system in the US and globally. And Honestly, I've been contemplating what that even means and would welcome anyone's thoughts on this. And I know there's a number of people who have been thinking about what sport could look like moving forward. And this is just one idea, is that sport offers so much. The world is changing, and to kind of circle back to that idea of sport mirroring society and those Olympic ideals of blending sport and culture and education, just offering up this one idea as we close off today, that school districts and schools are experiencing budget cuts. And I just heard today that the district that I live in is potentially using the gym space for classrooms. And so maybe sport can be the new outdoor classroom, where we teach things like social justice and PE and mental health and social emotional learning, and that collaborative spirit that the folks that put in the chat feature were talking about fun and connection, teamwork and fair play and competing and respect. That can all come to be on the playing field, and also lessen the burden of our schools, given there's so much on educators. And I know there's so much on coaches too, but just try to reimagine sport so that it's serving a new purpose for our society, so that it can be educational in nature and really prepare our kids for the future and be the new training ground. So I'm sure there are lots of ideas about what sport could look like, and really interested in other people's ideas. And you're welcome to email it to us here at Doc Wayne at support@docwayne.org. I'm sure Tiffany and Diana are also very interested, but did want to leave us with that one idealistic concept as we close off today, as well as some additional resources. And I'll give one more opportunity for Diana and Tiffany to weigh in before we close off with a few logistics.
Well, I will give Tiffany the last word because she's a world champion, so she deserves that in that. But I just want to say, like, we do have a tremendous opportunity, and it is daunting, and we are still in the thick of it, and we're just in the beginning of really kind of making some historic social change. But if we think about the future and we think about what could be, I think it will give us the energy to do the work that we need to do in the now.
I guess the biggest thing to me is it's like what you guys have been referring to, in the whole, like, where it is different now. And it does seem, it kind of goes back to the Me Too stuff. Like, why all of a sudden now more jumping on the racism, the biases, all these pieces, finally, I don't have the magic of why it's happening now, but finally people are talking about it and doing something about it en masse. So to me, what seems so different is that we have more people in our corner than ever before, to help facilitate change and kind of what's necessary to change as well.
Yeah, thank you both. And I guess I think back to when I first experienced sport as a little kid, and I just wanted to be outside. And honestly, and if he's listening, apologies, but I wanted to beat my brother. And it was just so joyful. And I learned almost every lesson that I've applied to my life in the backyard. And there was a bit of competition mixed in there. There honestly was, because I'm an extremely competitive person. But I also learned compassion. I learned about social justice. I learned about other people's differences. I learned about how to think critically, how to beat him, how to be a woman, how to be strong, how to make decisions. And that's what I want for our young people. And that's what they need to be able to take on the world as it is. And so I think these are very complex issues that our world is going through, but there's also that simplicity in going into your backyard and playing against your sibling. And that's what sport can offer. It's just that the picture of it is very complex and murky now because of what's happened. And so we need to look back at the simplicity of it and create a system that can bring about the very best in sport. So that's what I think about. So we want to thank all of you for joining us today. Doc Wayne's next webinar is on July 15th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And it is all about oppression and race and clinical interventions. And the 3 people on the webinar are absolutely amazing. And I want to highlight Dr. Natalie Court. And if you don't know her, you should absolutely look her up. And she's providing some additional webinars prior to ours, and absolutely recommend signing on to those. And I believe the next one is on Friday through William James College. And the previous webinars for ours can also be found on YouTube, and the handle for that is DocWayneDTG. And you can always reach us at support@docwayne.org. And you can see our Twitter handles up there. And most importantly, I just want to thank Diana Cutaia and Tiffeny Milbret for being on the webinar today. They've been absolutely fantastic. And I look forward to staying in touch and redesigning sport with both of you, and also everyone who listened in today. And we are truly a global team in this effort. And if you have any questions or want to get in touch with us, please do. And I just am very excited and hopeful for the future of sport. And I hope you all stay healthy and happy and have a wonderful day. So take care. Bye-bye.